In this video, I'm going to show you guys an easy formula to structure your beats. So let's get right into it. Alright, so I have this beat already loaded up that I made a while back, and I kind of just want to give you guys an easy breakdown of how I structure everything out. Alright, so let's just start off with the intro. So the intro is typically 4 to 16 bars long. You want to keep a balance of keeping the artist engaged enough with the beat for a long enough period of time to where they can actually hear themselves on the beat, but you also don't want to make it too long to where they just get tired and just skip to the next beat. So this beat, I made a long intro. I did a 16 bar intro because it has a long build up and then a switch up right as the beat drops. So let me show you. So I started off with the pad. And this just kind of sits in the background. This is the first layer of strings, and this one I have it sitting in the background because this is where the beat will switch. That layer has most of the EQ cut off because I have it kind of sitting in the background for the verse, and I layered that with the same strings without any frequencies cut off. And so you can see how that already starts to build up a lot of energy. And I'm going to mute everything else for the counter melody because I have this sitting low. Real easy, just repetitive. And then here's what everything sounds like with the simple bass line. So you can see there's just a lot of energy in this intro. That's why I extended it to 16 bars. So if you only have maybe 1 or 2 sounds, maybe it's better just to have a 4 to 8 bar intro and just have the beat drop right away. But as you can see in this beat, there was a lot of energy building up. So that's why I extended it. And not only that, I also introduced the hi-hat and the snare just to bring up the energy even more before the drop. And so once the verse comes in, what I did is I cut off both of the strings and I just left the pad with that low counter melody just to have a high contrast for that switch. And then you'll see I'll introduce the strings back in and you'll be able to see why I kept those strings low. And then for the verse, what you can do is you can introduce all the drums together like I did right here, or you can introduce half of the drums and then have it slowly build up to the rest of them. But you can see for this one, I kept it real simple and I just had all the drums playing together. And one last thing you'll notice is I have 2 different bass lines right here. So for the verse, because I took out all those other elements from the melody, I added a little more to the sub bass just so there's a little more bounce with it. So this is what it sounds like. Just a real easy bass line for the build up. You can see it's building up high. And then it drops. So you see how that bounce comes in. Alright, so now I'll play the second half of the intro just to keep it short, and I'll play the verse so you can see what I'm talking about that contrast. See how I introduced the strings and it's just like a background element, it's not overtaking everything. And I took them off just to add a little more variation throughout the verse. And also one thing I forgot to mention is a chorus can also be an intro. It depends on how you structure the beat, but in this case it would actually be like an 8 bar intro and then it would be an 8 bar chorus right here, but it's just a very short chorus. That's why I considered it more of like a second half to the intro. But now for the chorus, what I did is I brought back those strings and I also switched out the sub bass from having that more bouncy energy to it to bringing it back to just a simple build up. And for the drums, I just did a real easy build up. So just from the hi-hats building up to the snare and then building up to the kick. And you'll see when the second layer of strings comes in, you'll see how much energy that really brings into it. Just slowly bringing in the drums and that layer, man. So you see it just brings that build up right back. And this part is really important because instead of copying that same verse and applying it to this second half, what I did is I kept the energy going from the chorus into the verse with everything playing together, and then I slowly removed some of those elements. So it just gives you a different approach to the second half of the beat, so it's not too predictable, because you still want to keep the artist engaged with the beat the whole time they're listening to it. And this is also important because I had so much going on with the melody. I kept the drums just real simple, and I just had everything playing out throughout the whole verse. So you notice how whenever I have a lot of elements going on with the melody, I keep the drums really simple, and then if I'm doing a lot with the drums, I'll try to keep the melody real simple and not have too much going on. So that's really important. If you have a lot going on with your melody, you want to keep the drums as simple as possible and not have too much going on together, and vice versa. Alright, so I'll play the second half of the chorus with the verse so you can see how that energy carries on into the verse and gives you a different approach to the second half of the beat. So you notice how you can't even really tell that the verse already started, besides the fact that the sub has more bounce to it. And this is where you really notice. So the main emphasis I want to have about the arrangement is that you want it to be unpredictable. You want it to be interesting throughout the whole beat, but you also don't want too much changing to where the artist can't even keep up with everything that's changing throughout the beat. So it's just having a nice blend of variation throughout the beat, but still being able to keep the same rhythm or like pace, so that the artist doesn't have to jump around too much when they're writing. And for the outro, I think this is also really important too. What I used to do in the past is I used to kind of just cut off everything and maybe just have one or two parts of the melody playing as an outro, just slowly fading off. But what I notice is that you still want to keep them engaged to the very end. You don't want them to know right away like, oh, this is the end, let me just jump off. So that's why sometimes I'll still keep some elements of the drums in there. So as you can see, I kept the bass, but instead of having that bouncy bass, I went back to that original just slow build up. And then the hi-hat just pretty much gives it that element to where you still are unsure if it's the end, and that's kind of what you want. And another big thing is that you can see that I brought in the first layer of the strings, and that also kind of gives you an unsure sign of whether this is still the verse or if it's just leading to the outro. So I'll play the last part of the verse with the outro so you can see how they blend together. So you see how it's pretty unpredictable to tell whether that was the outro or not. And then once it fades off, you know like, oh, this is the end, but by then you're already at the end. And one last thing, just know that this isn't an end all be all. This is just a structure that I like to follow to keep my beats interesting. But it also depends on whether you have a lot going on with your melody. Because if I just had a real simple like 8-bar, I would probably do a little more with the drums to keep them engaged and have variation throughout the beat. Let me know what kind of video you'd like to see next in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.